Luke with Trace Velo here. Does your old road bike look like this? But you dream of a bike like this? You might think you need many thousands of dollars, but Trace Velo Industries is here to show you there is another way. For one easy payment of absolutely nothing, this video will show you how to build the bike of your dreams for a price you can only dream of. Call today. Please don't actually call this number.
Okay, so today I'm going to be building a bike from scratch for a really good friend of mine, and it's actually going to be very similar to my bike, which I've got up on the stand here behind me. So it's going to be the same frame, although this is a 58 centimeter frame, and the bike I'm building today is a slightly smaller 52 centimeter frame, and the group set as well will be the same, which is a Tiagra 4700 group set. And because it's my day off, I'm also going to be drinking cheap Czech lager. Because I'm also over 18. Cheers. Okay, so my friend was really keen to get himself a nice lightweight carbon road bike, but he didn't want to break the bank because as I've said before, you can spend many thousands of pounds on these things. So I sourced all the parts separately, and I've put together what I think is a cracking value carbon road bike. And I got it all for just under £730. But before we get into the actual build, let me give you a rundown of all the parts, and as we go, I'll put the costs up in the corner here so you can keep track. So let's go. Okay, so we can essentially split the build into 4 areas. Number 1, we've got the frame. Number 2, we've got the wheels. Number 3, we've got handlebars, saddle and pedals. And number 4, we've got the group set. And we've also got one more little guy, and it's this little thing here. So this is an inline barrel adjuster, and it adjusts the gear cable tension specifically for the front derailleur, because one of these didn't come with the group set. But I'll show you where this goes in the build. Okay, so this is the frame, and as I've said, it's the same one that I use for my own bike, which was on the stand earlier, just it's a little bit smaller. So if we bring you in, it's all carbon fiber, so you got the frame itself, you get the seat post here, and you also get this, this front fork, so that's pretty simple stuff. But included with the frame, you also get a finishing kit. So these are all the bits and bobs that come with the frame, which I'll quickly show you. So this is what you get in the finishing kit. So first of all, you get the bottom bracket here, which is a press fit type. So I'll be pressing that into the frame later. And then here we've got the headset bearing. So this is a bearing race that the bearings sit on, and this is the bearing itself. So this is the bottom bearing, and this is the top bearing, and again the bearing race, and this is the cap for those. We've got this little bolt here, which helps secure the front brake caliper, so nothing too special there. This is basically the seat post clamp, which I've showed in a previous video actually. This is the clamp which keeps the saddle on top of the seat post. So yeah, this is the headset compression device, which I will be installing later. This is a rear derailleur hanger, and these 2 little pieces here are just to kind of help route the cables through the frame. So yeah, there's the finishing kit. Okay, so these are the wheels I chose. These are pretty standard aluminium clincher style rim brake wheels, nice and lightweight, and they are Vision Team 30, so they're 30mm deep, and they've got some nice bladed aero spokes here. So that's the rear, that's the front, and we've also got here, we've got some 25C road tires, pretty simple stuff, a pair of those, and a pair of inner tubes. So we've got some 40mm wide aluminium drop bars. We've got an 80mm aluminium stem there. We've got some Shimano SPD-SL pedals. They come with cleats too. We've got a nice gel road saddle, and we've got some pretty standard gel bar tape.
Present the group set. Ready. Fight. Perfect. Trace Velo wins. Flawless victory.
Okay, so now I've shown you all the parts. Let's get on to the build.
Okay, so for the remainder of the video, I go into loads of detail around the build, but I understand not everyone wants to see the whole thing. So for the filthy casuals that don't want to watch the entirety of this cinematic masterpiece, I've put some timestamps in the video description.
Okay, so first and foremost, I'm going to be press fitting the bottom bracket into the bike frame, and I'll be using this apparatus here basically. So this is one of the bottom bracket cups. You can see the bearing in there, and I've got the other one on this bearing press device here. So if I bring you in, this is the bearing press device, and there's a threaded bar here, and this moves freely on it. So this is the other bottom bracket cup. So basically what you do is you've got an Allen key bolt there for this Allen key, and you thread it on, and it threads into this cup here, and it just slowly kind of pushes this into the frame. So I've got it set up here in the frame. You can see I've got the bearing press tool through the frame, and that's where it's going to sit in this hole basically, and there's the cup. And we've got the threaded rod through, and it threads into this cup here. So it's going to kind of clamp it together. And what you can see is I've put a little bit of paste on the bearing cup here, and also a little bit inside. And that's this stuff right here. So it's called fiber grip, and it's basically a paste that has little glass fibers in it, and it just creates a little bit of friction. You can see there, creates friction, reduces slippage. So it just means that it'll be a nice tight fit in there. So let me get going, and I'll press it in. Okay, so I've got it set up here, and I've got my Allen key, so I'm just going to start basically threading it in, and you can hear that crunching. That's because that's the little glass fibers in the paste just kind of binding, and that's a good sound because it means that there's going to be a lot of friction on this cup, because basically you don't want this to shift, because this is where all the power is being transferred through when you pedal. So you want this to be nice and tight. So squeeze it in. Okay, so that's done. Let's quickly do the other side, and the bottom bracket will be installed. Okay, so this is basically the other side, so exactly the same again. I've got the cup on the other side, and I've put a little bit of that grip paste on it, so you hear that kind of crunching. As some of you may recall the last time I did this, I didn't actually have a bearing press like this, and I managed to do it with 2 chopping boards, one either side, and just a hammer, just like slamming away and fitting these in. And it worked actually just fine. So you don't necessarily need this bearing press to get this job done. So do bear that in mind. I mean, it makes things easier, but it's not 100% necessary. As long as you kind of get these seated properly in there, by whatever means, you know, you're good to go. So yeah, but let's get this seated in here, and that is done. Excellent! Okay, cool, so we've got the bottom bracket fitted there. There's a little bit of the old carbon grease residue there, but I can clean that off easy. Next up is the rear derailleur hanger, which goes here. This piece of plastic is just what they use in shipping for the frame, so that it doesn't basically get crushed, so it prevents it from getting crushed. But what we'll do next is, I've got it here, so this is the rear derailleur hanger, and it's got 2 bolts there, just bolt straight in, and that hole is where the rear derailleur goes into. So what I tend to do is, when I'm bolting things together on a frame like this, I'll put a little bit of grease on the 2 interfaces between the 2 parts, and I'll be using this grease here. So this is just some multi-purpose grease, you can see there. So I'll just spread a little bit of that on this part here, and we'll bolt it together. Okay, let's get this on. Okay, so one of the reasons that I tend to grease the parts that bolt on or interface with the bike is that I really hate it when your bike creaks or clicks underneath you when you're riding along. And I found that using grease like this tends to eliminate this problem completely, so it's an extra step I always try to take. Okay, so we've installed the rear derailleur hanger there. Now we're going to install the crank arms, left and right, front derailleur, and the rear derailleur as well. We're going to attach it to the hanger. One little trick as well is I've got the drive side crank help me here. So this is the axle which goes through. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on this axle just to ensure it's all nicely lubed up in there. Cool. All right, let's get going.
Okay, so again here, I've taken the time to add a touch of grease to the crank axle, and this serves two purposes. One, trying to keep things nice and creak-free, and two, as this is one of the parts on the frame that is closest to the road, a little bit of grease goes a long way to keeping water away from the bottom bracket bearings in case you get caught out in the rain, for example.
Okay, so I've got it done. I've got the drive side crank on with the chain rings here, and also the other side has been fixed on. It spins nice and free. I've also got the front derailleur on here, and I've got the rear derailleur.
So bear in mind that I didn't bother including the footage of adding the derailleurs because all it entails in both cases is literally using an Allen key to do up a bolt.
So a few things to note. So the front derailleur here, you might be able to see, if I just zoom in, there's a sticker there which says 1 to 3 millimeters, and that's basically the distance you want these teeth away from this metal piece here. So I've got it basically bang on. So when you engage the derailleur, the teeth don't hit the arm. One little thing to talk about at the back here, you've got this screw here. So let me bring you around the other side and I'll see if I can get a better shot. Okay, so this is a little bit of a better shot. And you can see that this is the rear derailleur hang, and it's got this lip here, this like edge. This screw, you can see that this pivots on here. This screw is to set certain lever tensions in the derailleur, so you need to have this piece set so that screw butts against that little lip there. And that's basically done. Okay, next up, super easy bit. I'm gonna fit these pedals onto the crank arms. So let's get going.
Once again, grease comes back into play.
It's one thing you gotta remember, is to grease your nuts. Yeah?
These nuts.
So the thread on the pedals is one of the most common areas where creaks can occur, and putting a little dab here will also aid massively when you want to remove the pedals in the future.
So next up, we're going to be fitting this front fork. So that obviously fits through a hole in the frame here. I'll show you that in a second. But before we can fit this, we need to fit these. So these are the headset bearings and the various races. So I'll show you where these go now.
Hold up.
Okay, so one thing I have just quickly noticed, I was about to put those bearings in the headset, and I've got these bearing races which I showed you. So this is the bearing race for the top, and you can see there's a split in it. This is the bearing race for the bottom, and it has no split in it, which is a bit of a problem. So I'll show you where this fits. This fits on the bottom of here, so you slide that on, and the bearing sits on that so it can rotate nice and easily. This is the headset bearing, so if I show you, you should be able to see there's like a 45-degree angle here, and that is because it sits on top of this bearing race, so you can see that's angled as well. Hopefully the camera's focusing. And it sits on top like that, just like that, and it rotates. But the reason it has that split is so that this can open up very slightly and seat properly on top of that fork. But it doesn't do that currently, it gets stuck there and it needs to sit a bit further down. So I'm gonna have to cut a slit in it, just like the other one, so it fits properly.
5 minutes later.
Okay, we're back. So after a couple of minutes bodging away, I've got a little slit in there so it opens up now. It's a bit rough, but it honestly doesn't matter because it's literally just what the bearing sits on. And now, when I stick it on, it clips all the way down. And so it's seated there properly. So yeah, that's pretty much solved. And now, good to go.
Alright, let's move out.
Okay, so in terms of where these actual bearings fit, so I've got the top bearing here and this is the bottom bearing. They fit in these recesses here, so hopefully, let me check, you can see that, yeah. So this top bearing will sit nicely in there. It'll obviously seat better once I've compressed it all in, and the bottom one sits up in that recess, up in there. And you can see that there are sort of angles on that bearing, to help it sit nicely. So I'll get these installed. And I'll obviously put a little bit of grease up in here. So it's, again, just to minimize any potential creaks. Same for the top. And then I'll just stick it all together and we'll get the stem and the handlebar put on next.
So one of the great things about this frame is the fact that it uses cartridge style bearings. So in the event that any of the bearings, either in the headset or the bottom bracket, get worn out, they are super cheap and really, really easy to replace.
Okay, so here it is done. I've put in the bearings and you can see it's a little bit greasy around here because I use quite a lot of grease. So that's a good thing to note, is that you want to grease the bearing quite heavily in here because this can get a lot of water ingress because when you're riding along, the wheel is going to spin up water and a lot of it's going to end up in here. So you want that to be well greased just to prevent any potential rust issues later down the line. I fitted the top bearing in there as well, and then this cap on here. And these are spacers. So I've put the stem on just to kind of hold it together. And these spacers here are basically because I don't know how sort of high my friend is going to want his handlebars basically. So I put 3 on there, which is quite excessive, but we can see how that goes. So next up, I'm going to be securing the handlebars. Okay, so I've got the handlebars on here. So you'll be able to see, super easy to attach. You just got the 4 bolts here, 1, 2, 3, 4. That comes off, just bolt that on, easy peasy. Also off camera, I've added the rear brake here, but that's super easy to bolt on. You've got a bolt that comes out the back, and then you've got a piece in here which you just do up, and it tightens it into the frame. The front brake here is slightly different. So if I bring it over, you should be able to see that the bolt is not long enough to reach through this kind of extended front fork piece here. So included with the finishing kit, if I just grab it, is this bolt. So this is an extended bolt and it just fits in the back here like that. Pop that in and then it interfaces with that bolt on top there, and yeah, jobs are good. So I will get that fitted right now. Okay, so we've made quite a lot of progress. I've got the front brake on now and the rear brake, and we've got most of the drivetrain added to the bike. So next up, I'm gonna get the wheels put on. So let's get cracking.
Speed is of the essence.
Okay, so you can see the bike is really starting to shape up. Once you get the wheels on, it always looks really good. So you can kind of see how it's coming together. So yeah, exciting stuff. But next up, I'm gonna get the shifters, so these bad boys. I'm gonna get them mounted on here, just because you can do them before you do the bar tape. Get them on, and then I'm also going to mount the saddle that I've got here. So the saddle onto this seat post. So I've got a little set of clamps that I can clamp those on. And then I'll stick that in as well, and then it will really start to come together. So yeah, it's all going really well so far. So we're going to be attaching this shifter to the handlebar now. So you can see on the bottom here, it's got this loop, and this is what the handlebar goes through. So you put the handlebar through there.
Mission failed. We'll get them next time.
You put the handlebar through there, and that's what grips it on. So if I peel back the rubber, you should be able to see right there, there's a bolt, it's just there, and it's an Allen key bolt, and once you do that up, it kind of clamps that in. So you thread this through onto the handlebar, do up that bolt, and it clamps it to the bar. One thing to mention as well is that these shifters actually came, this is the gear cable, so it came with it pre-installed. And that just makes things a little bit easier. So let's go ahead and get this installed onto the handlebar.
Right, so when attaching the shifters, I don't add any grease here. I've never had any creaks from this area, and grease isn't necessary to aid in removal, so I don't bother applying any.
So one quick thing to note is that when you are putting these together, you kind of want this to be relatively flush. So if I pull this back, we'll have a quick look. So you can see that that's relatively flat. Here to here, which is basically how you want it. So I would do up that bolt nice and tight now, and then we'll do the same for the other side. And that's the shifters attached to the bike.
So here I'm attaching the saddle to the seat post, super easy process, just doing up a couple of bolts basically. But again, stick a little bit of grease in there, it's going to help prevent creaks and help removal in the future as well. Okay, so here we are. I've made loads of progress actually. So I've got all the major components on, most of the drivetrain is on, and I've got the shifters basically in a position they need to be, wheels on, brakes on. Basically, what's kind of left now is mainly cabling. So I just need to sort of set up the cable routing for the brakes and the gears. It's quite a big task, but I think we're ready to crack on with it now. So yeah, let's get going. Okay, so I've brought you in a little bit closer just so I can kind of give you an idea of how I'm going to be setting up these cables. So both the gear and the brake cables, they both run from the shifter underneath the bar tape. But one thing to quickly mention is that the types of cable for gear and for brakes are different. So I'll try and show you. I've got, this is a gear cable obviously, because it's coming out of the shifter and it's connected to the gears. This is a brake cable. So I'm going to try and show you. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see or not, but the brake cable is quite a lot chunkier than the gear cable. And that's because the brake cable has to take a lot more tension when you kind of really giving it welly on the brakes. This is also reflected in the casings for the cable. So if I get them now, I'll show you. So you have different style housings for the cables. You've got gear cable housing and brake cable housing, and their construction is slightly different. But the main difference is the fact that the gear cable it's a lot thicker. I'm not sure if you can see, but basically, well, I say a lot, there's 1 millimeter in it basically. So you've got the gear cable here is about 1 millimeter thinner than the brake cable here. So yeah, that's worth noting, and it's really important because you can't get these messed up. So you've got two different types of cables, and coincidentally, two different type of cable outers. So let's get these installed. Okay, so the first step when you're kind of looking to cable a bike like this is you want to start mocking up where the cable outers are going to sit, because you need to know the length of them so you can chop them at the right length. So if I demonstrate here, so out the back of the shifter here, you've got a little hole, you can see it there, and that goes to the brake lever. So that's where the brake cable comes out, and you would stick the outer in there, and then you'd need to run it underneath the handlebar here, and then I can show you, it would kind of pop out underneath the handlebar tape and it would go to here. And this is the hole in the frame which runs back, and the cable would run along here, and it runs back to the rear brake. So that's where you would get the braking done. With the front brake, it's roughly the same. So you've got a little hole in here, you'd run it down, but it would eject out the bottom of the bar tape straight down into this here, which is the brake pivot. Gear cables are roughly the same. So the gear cable would run underneath the bar tape here, and then you would put them in either here or here, these two holes, and that would run down to the front derailleur there and the rear derailleur. Okay, so I'm going to try and demonstrate for you how you can like mock up the cable outers and kind of cut them the right length. So I've put here, I've got the brake cable outer stuck into the back of the shifter here, and I've routed it along the handlebar using a bit of electrical tape, which is how you secure these cable outers underneath the bar tape when it's all wrapped up. So in this case, it would come underneath and it would poke out the bottom of the bar tape. And here with this brake cable, it would then go into this hole here, which would then feed out the back to the rear brake. So one of the things you need to be conscious of when you're cutting these cables is you don't want them to be too short, because if they're too short, what will happen, I'll try and demonstrate for you. So if it's too short, it means that when you turn, you won't be able to turn the handlebars enough because it's too tight. Conversely, if you give it too much length, they kind of poke out the front, and when you turn the other way, they kind of poke out, if you see what I mean. So it's a bit of a balancing act. This happens to be basically exactly the right length as it is. So that's really fortunate. But if you're doing this for the first time, my advice would be to kind of get it to where you think is the correct length,
and then give yourself about another inch, because you can always cut more of the cable off. You can't add more cable on. So I'm going to try and do the rest now, and we'll see how that goes.
And here's a little tip.
Okay, so I've got two more little tips for you when you're cabling your bike. So this is a gear cable outer, brake cable outer, and if I can get it to focus, which it has done, yes. So this is where the brake cable outer has been cut, and you can see it's a little bit ragged. So you've got the plastic outer, the black plastic outer, and then inside that you've got kind of a metal spiral, and that's what gives this a bit of rigidity. And then inside that is another tube with kind of some clear white plastic, and that's what the actual brake cable runs in. So that's designed to kind of reduce friction. But you can see when it's been cut, it's left a sort of raggedy edge on that inside tube. If I show you the other end, which I've neatened up, you can see that the hole is much, much bigger. So I'll try and get them side by side for you, so you can see the difference. So the one I've opened up is on the
Right.
and the other one is on the
Left.
So the one on the
Right.
will be a lot easier to feed the brake cable through. So the way you can open that up is by using a little set of needle nose pliers. So I'll try and show you what to do. It's going to be quite difficult. But basically you get the end of the needle nose pliers and you poke it into the end of that, wiggle it around, and then you should be able to see that it's opened that hole right up. And now that's going to be a lot easier to kind of slip the brake cable into. So yeah, that's a top tip, and I'll quickly show you my other tip.
Right.
Okay, so this is my other little tip. So this is where this brake cable outer, this is where it goes into the back of the shifter. But the thing is, in order to kind of stop corrosion, because basically that little metal piece in there, that little metal ring to give it rigidity, is made of steel, so it'll rust. So in order to kind of increase the life of it, what you should do is, if I can quickly demonstrate, you should get your multi-purpose grease. There it is. So I keep banging on about grease in this build, but it is really important because it just stops problems further down the line. And what you'll need to do, I'll try and show you when it's all zoomed in like this, but you just get a little bit of grease on there, you know, just dab it. A little dab will do, yeah? And then we've greased up that cable. And now when you slide it in, it's gonna kind of prevent any corrosion. Because if any moisture does get in there, which is unlikely to, but if it does, that's going to protect it. So every time you're kind of fitting cables like this, always try and grease the ends, because everyone loves a greasy end. God, that's an awful joke. But it just helps stop corrosion, and it's just a fantastic idea. So 2 top tips for you there, and let's continue. Okay, so there's quite a few little bits and pieces to show you with regards to the cabling, and this is one of them. So this is a ferrule. So you get them in your group set. Normally they come included if you buy the whole thing, and these kind of are cable ends. So, well, cable outer ends. So in this case, this little metal one is for a brake cable. So you might be able to see here that I've successfully routed the brake cable for the front brake. It comes out here. And then I've cut it to the right length, and it'll sit in there. But rather than shoving the bare cable end in the bottom of this cap, stick this little ferrule on, and that will pop in there, and that just helps it kind of everything move a little bit freer. I'll obviously stick a bit of grease inside this cup because I do like greasing my ends.
That's a funny joke.
Yeah, and that's just another little thing to show you. Okay, so we've basically got the brake cables on the front at least. There's one more cable to route on the rear, but the brake cables for the front up here are basically cut to size, and they're all good to go really. So we've got the brake cable here for the front into the front brake, and this one is the correct length to be routed into, if I grab it, into that little hole there. The next, we're on to gear cable routing. So, well, routing the outers. So this is where they pop out of, right here. And as we mentioned ferrules earlier, there are 2 special ferrules that you get with the Shimano Tiagra group set. I'm sure it's the same on others, but they're these 2. So you only get 2 of them, and they're quite important because they really help route the cables properly. So I'll put one down and I'll show you how they work. So hopefully if it'll focus in on it, you should be able, go on, you should be able to see, there we go, there's a little ridge there, and then there's a kind of a syringe end on that. And that little ridge fits into that little ridge there. Because this cable will eventually run through that syringe end and the ferrule out of that little slot, and then it will go into the gear cable. But this piece fits, if I can do it one-handed. Okay, so here we go. We've got the special ferrule, and it should just slot into there. Just like so, boom. So you can see it's seated in there now. So yeah, we'll start routing the cables now. So I'll seat the other ferrule on the other side, and we can see how long the gear outers need to be to kind of feed into these two holes under here. Cool, let's go.
Right, so when setting up the cabling, you have a choice of which shifter controls which brake. For example, in my setup, I prefer to have the front brake actuated by the left shifter, but in the UK, the brakes are generally set up the other way around, so it's just a matter of personal preference really. You should also be able to see that the gear cable outers are set up in exactly the same way as the brake cable outers. Just mock them up, take them to the handlebars, check for length by turning left and right, and finally just cut them to size.
Okay, so we're making some really good progress. We've got the gear cables and the brake cables for both shifters seated in and affixed to the handlebars. So I'll quickly bring you in so you can see we've got brake cable here coming out the top, and we've got a gear cable coming out the bottom. And they route round, same for the other side. We've got gear here, brake here, and those are just the outers, and we've affixed them to the handlebars here, and that will all be covered by the bar tape. So we've got the gear cables hanging out of the shifters here. So they'll actually, I'll see if I can bring you in actually. Let me zoom you in. So you can see that little syringe end from before. The gear cable will go through there and then it will route along. So then we need to start looking at routing these bare cables through the frame. So let me chat about that quickly. Okay, so you may have noticed all of these white tubes hanging like IV tubes out of a dead patient or something, I don't know, that's a bit morbid. Yeah, anyway, so you may have noticed them hanging out of the frame, and these are to help route the cables through the frame, because the cable outers just sit in these little pockets, and it's the gear cables that run through. So the gear outers don't run through the frame, it's only the cables themselves. And obviously, if these weren't here, you would have a hell of a job. I assume it would take days probably to be able to feed your just cable through here and for it to come out the back here out of a little hole. How the hell would you do that? So you need to have these tubes routed through in order for you to actually get the cables through there. So there's one here for the brake, one here for one of the gears, and one on the other side as well. So that's this one right here, and it's coming out of this hole. So yeah, let's get going basically, and we'll see how far we get. Okay, so what I've decided to tackle first is I've decided to tackle the front brake cable. So that's the brake cable that comes out of here and it actuates the front brake. So it attaches here, and the cable obviously runs up here to this shifter on this side. So what I need to do is there's this little piece here with the hole in. That's where the end of the brake cable, this piece here, that's where this piece will sit. So that will sit in that little hole in there, and when you pull it, it'll actuate and pull the front brake. So I'm going to route that first. So it'll route through that little hole, out the back, and yeah, we'll see how we get on. One thing to note, which I always do, another top tip for when you're cabling your bikes, is if I grab the cable, when I run the cables, what I tend to do is as I'm feeding them through, I'll oil them up as well. So I'll put a little bit of, I've got what is essentially WD-40, it's a different brand name, but just a little coating of oil just to help things keep nice and smooth running through the cable outers. You can use them without any lubrication on at all, but I like to put a little bit of oil or something on the brake cables. Nothing too heavy, so something like grease is too thick, but a very light oil is perfect. So I'll coat the cable as I'm kind of feeding it through. So let's get cracking. More time lapse.
So I find cable routing is one of the most tedious jobs when building a bike. If you're replacing cables, it's not actually too bad because you can just match the length of the existing cable outers. But cabling a bike fresh can take a good few hours the first time you tackle it. But take your time, and if in doubt, cut things a bit longer than you think.
Okay, so that's done. So I've routed that through. If I pull this down, yep, you can see it doesn't move all the way now. That's because it's popped through and I've connected it to the brake. So when I pull the lever, brake actuates. So yeah, all functions properly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to route the gear cable. So it's essentially exactly the same premise. I'll just be routing it through the top, this slimmer one here that runs along the bottom, actually, this here. And I'll be routing it through this hole using this tube. So it's essentially the same, but I'll just route the gear cable through this tube first. And it's the one that actuates the front derailleur here. So this tube should pop out, yeah, I'll get it attached to there. Okay, so the cabling is, yeah, it's all done actually.
So I got a little bit carried away here, and I forgot to film the time lapse of me cabling the rest of the bike, but it follows exactly the same principles, except this time I was just feeding the rear brake and gear cables through the frame using their respective white cabling tubes, which I showed earlier.
So here it is at the front, and as you can see, yeah, it all looks really neat and tidy. I haven't put the bar tape on yet, so it'll hide all this. But yeah, I'm really pleased actually. It's good and tidy, and yeah, nothing catches, like I said. So these are the gears. So this is the front mech, or the front derailleur, and this one here goes to the rear derailleur, and they go down in the frame there. Front derailleur is there, and the other one continues along to the rear derailleur back there. So one of the things I've had to add in is this barrel adjuster, which I showed you earlier. So the reason for this is because there is no barrel adjuster for the front derailleur kind of included on the group set, and I'll try and show you what I mean. So this is the front brake, and this here, this is a barrel adjuster basically. This is slightly different. So this is an inline barrel adjuster. This is a barrel adjuster attached to the brake, and what it does is it allows you to change the tension of the cable quite easily. So you can make kind of minor adjustments to the tension without having to undo this bolt and actually change the tension on the actual cable. So if I quickly show you what I mean. So you can see there's kind of a screw thread on it, and when you unscrew it, it increases the tension. So I can possibly show you that actually. So you might be able to see there's a little bit of a gap there between the brake caliper, the brake pad and the rim. And as I twist this up, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So if I keep twisting it, you can see I'm twisting it up here. If I keep twisting it, now the brake is actually locked shut because I've increased the tension in the cable here, and it's basically as if I'm braking. So this is how you change the tension of the cable. So I'll put that back down, give me a second. And as you can see, the wheel spins freely now. So that's how you can kind of change the tension and adjust it quite finely. So you have a barrel adjuster on the front brake. You have a barrel adjuster on the back. This is the rear brake. And you also have a barrel adjuster here on the rear mech, so the rear derailleur. So this is how you can change, fine tune the way the gears shift. The issue is that these are all included, these barrel adjusters are all part of the component. So you've got one here on the rear mech, one on the brake and one on the front brake. You don't have one included on the front mech. So there isn't one here, this is just a clamp. So what I've had to do is I've had to put an inline one here. And that's basically all it does. So it doesn't come included on the component. So I've put one inline. So that's a little explanation there for you. Okay, so there is one more job that I need to get done before I can call the cabling complete. And you might have spotted that some of these cables are a little bit long. So I'll snip them off, and then I need to put these on as well, actually. So these things here, let me grab a couple and show you. These are little end caps. So these little caps, I just crimp on the end of the cables, and that's to stop them fraying, basically. So yeah, I'll get that done now. Okay, now that's done, we're basically on to kind of finishing touches now. So I'll wrap the bar tape, fit the chain, and then I'll also address this slightly odd protrusion out the top here. Montage of wrapping bar tape. Na 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 na. Da 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 da. Bah. Okay, cool, so that is done. The chain is fitted and it actually came out of the bag the right length. So I didn't have to resize it, which was super useful. And I've indexed it all and I've kind of set this barrel adjuster here so it shifts nicely and the front derailleur is set up. So that's basically, that's done. And the bar tape, I'm really, really pleased with how it came out. It's super even, looks great. And I've actually managed to get it so there's exactly the same number of twists on both sides. So it's super duper even. And also, this finishing tape here is really good quality. For whatever reason, I'm just kind of enthralled with it. Anyway, really good. So chain is on, works great, shifts flawlessly, bar tape's on, looks incred, and it's got a little bit of squish as well. The last little thing I need to address is this protrusion here, and I'll explain it for you quickly now. Okay, so this is a headset compression device, and if I pull it out I can show you how it works. So there's a threaded bolt, which you might be able to see in there, which is actuated by this Allen key. So this is an Allen key which goes all the way down, and basically what happens is when you screw that Allen key in, it compresses it and it kind of expands out. So the notion is, it's very similar to this in a way, this seat post clamp. So you screw it in and it clamps into this steereo tube here. And what I basically need to do is cut the steereo tube to length so I can fit this, and it will basically compress everything in the headset, so all the headset bearings and everything, compress everything together so it's all nice and tight and there's no up and down wobble. But the reason I'm kind of holding off cutting it is because I don't know the kind of stance basically my mate is going to want on his bike. So you can see here I've got 4 1 centimeter spaces here, which is actually quite a lot. But ultimately I don't know how aggressive the seating position my friend is going to want to have his bike set at. So if I pull back, you'll be able to see that the difference between the height of the saddle and the height of the handlebars, it's not a great deal. It's higher, but not massively higher. And the bigger the difference between the height of the saddle and the height of the handlebars, the more kind of aggressive you are in your position on the bike. Some people like a really aggressive position, and some people kind of want a more relaxed, straight over position. So basically, I won't cut this yet. I'll get my friend to come and have a look at it, get him to kind of sit on it, see how he feels, and at that point I can set the height that we want the handlebars to sit at, and then I'll cut the steereo tube. In terms of cutting it, it's relatively easy. I'll just use a hacksaw and just chop it straight off. It's not an exact science. So that is the mystery of the protrusion solved. Okay, cool. So we've finished. So apart from that, which I'll cut, as I mentioned, when my mate gets here, and I can kind of do a rudimentary fit to get him set up on the bike. Once that's done, boom, it's finished. Apart from, as you can see, there are lots of little greasy handprints all over the bike, which makes it look like it's been kind of assaulted by some greasy-handed kids or something. But apart from that, yeah, it's all done, and I'm really pleased with it. I think it looks pucker, and yeah, chuffed with it, chuffed to bits. So jobs are good. Quick, got him.
Left.
Okay, cool. So that was the build. I've handed over the bike now, and my mate really loves it. It rides really well, and he's really pleased with it, especially for the price he paid. So yeah, happy all round. As I mentioned, when he got here, I gave him kind of a rudimentary fit on the bike, so I got him set up, and we ended up cutting the steerer tube down, so there were 3 1cm spaces underneath the stem. So on my bike here, I've got 2 1cm spaces, so 3 is perfectly fine. Once he gets a little bit more comfortable on the bike, we might drop that down a spacer or 2, but it's perfect as is, really. Anyway, that's all for now. So subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. And if you've got any questions or comments about this bike build I've just done, or bike building in general, throw them down in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to as many of you as I can. Anyway, that's all. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.